Okay, so this is a little bit of a video, not so much teaching you about the witches in Macbeth, but more about how you might approach writing about the witches in Macbeth and how you might gather some of your ideas in order to write about them. It stands to reason that with the witches being such a significant part of the play and seem to be present in some way throughout, whether that be physically present on stage or present in Macbeth's mind or influencing Macbeth and decisions in some way, the witches are quite important, and having an understanding of the witches is important for any exam question. Okay, so let's start off by looking at this opening scene from Macbeth, and it is significant that it is the opening scene, but let's begin by looking at the setting. So we can't ignore the setting. It is a play, we're supposed to see it, we're supposed to absorb it from a visual point of view as well. And the setting, this deserted place in which this first scene is set, is isolated. It shows that perhaps the people in it are ostracised, they're cast out by society, they're no longer part of society, and they are in fact in the wilderness. And of course the root word from wilderness being wild shows that perhaps these creatures, these people, these witches as we know them to be, are out of control, or in fact uncontrollable. The forces that they meddle with render them uncontrollable. And of course we consider them being wild as being feral, and that has connotations of danger and fear, and how we should fear them and beware of them. So the message here, straight away from the setting, is that we must beware these characters that are presented to us at the very beginning. They are not to be trusted. So the next thing that we'll look at is straight away looking at the stage directions. Again, the fact that this is a play and is supposed to be observed and watched and enjoyed by an audience, the stage direction is really important. So Shakespeare uses pathetic fallacy here. And this helps to create a really ominous and foreboding mood in this opening scene. We watch the scene, we see these three weird sisters, we see these three witches in a wilderness, isolated setting, and straight away we understand that Shakespeare is trying to foreshadow the danger that they're going to bring in future scenes, and that they're meddling with the darkness is only going to bring darkness upon this tragic play. It's also important to note that the witches, the stereotypical view of witchcraft, was that they were able to control the weather. So here again, there's the sense that the thunder and lightning is a result of the witches and what they're doing right now, rather than just coincidental. It's also important to note that whilst in the script here, and often modern script, it calls them witches, they would have been originally referred to as the weird sisters. Weird not meaning what we'd associate it with today, that being unusual, strange, whilst they would have been. The word weird would have in fact meant fate from Old English. So there's obviously some links there with the idea that the witches could predict the future, and given that within this first speech they do actually mention Macbeth, albeit not here right now in front of us, it shows us that their future is inextricably linked, and that Macbeth's fate from this point on will be intertwined with that of the witches. Looking at the first few lines then, notice how much we've said before we've even got onto those first couple of actual lines, but we can notice straight away that there's rhyming couplets, again and rain. And alongside the rhyming couplets, we can also note that Shakespeare uses trochaic tetrameter here, which, without going into too much detail about what trochaic tetrameter is, we can note that it is different to the iambic pentameter or even the prose that is used for most of the other characters throughout the play. So it separates these characters as being very different to everybody else. And again, fits in with the idea of them being isolated and ostracised. They are separate from society. They don't belong in society in the same way that we would associate the other characters or expect the other characters to fit in. So this also, along with all the other clues that we've been given there, creates the rhythm of a spell and creates that sense of witchcraft, and again indicates to an audience that these are in fact witches. There would have been nobody stood on at the front of the stage and said, "Welcome everybody, we're going to start scene one by showing you some witches. You all need to beware of witches." The audience would have been expected to pick these clues up from the language, from the setting, like we've explored here. So all of these clues portray them as the archetypal witch, the typical witch, what you would expect to see a witch to look like, to act like, where you would expect to find them, what you'd expect the weather to be doing at the time. And of course this would appease James I, who was fascinated with witchcraft. He of course wrote Demonology, which was partly used to reinvigorate people's fear in witchcraft after his own experiences with witchcraft, and of course after the attempted assassination of Parliament and James I through the Gunpowder Plot. And whilst there's more that we could say by looking at this scene and looking at some of the language that's used in the scene, we've actually got plenty to go on there, and we've got lots of different things we can actually discuss just by looking at the setting, looking at the stage direction, and just looking at some really simple rhyme, and in fact even the name of the characters. So here I've put together a little bit of a paragraph in the form of a waggle to show you how I've used some of those ideas that I've gathered from just making some simple notes on the opening paragraph, just trying to think a little bit beyond the actual obvious meaning of the language and dig a little bit deeper to some of the inferences that Shakespeare is trying to make here, and put it into a paragraph that is analytical and starts to explore and explain the ideas. So it might be a good opportunity here for you to actually pause this video and just take a moment to read through a couple of times some of the ideas and see how I've put them together. So the first thing you'll notice is that just with that simple opening line, that simple connective, I've just told us which part of the play I'm talking about. I've then moved on to actually making a point by picking out a device that's been used and what it's been used for. Immediately followed by some evidence. I've not stopped to say, for example, or this is evident when, because the evidence actually just fits nicely into the sentence that I'm using. I'll then move on to a little bit of an explanation, what it does, why it's been used. It reinforces the solitary natures of the Weird Sisters. Notice as well how I've used words that I've actually referred to in my analysis previously, such as solitary, ostracised, weird, foreshadowing. Okay, so I begin to explain some of my ideas here in these first couple of lines. I then take my explanation a little bit further. I don't just leave it at one line, I move on, I carry on and start to develop another device that's been used, such as the foreshadowing, and the purpose of the witches and how they actually impact on the rest of the play, why this is a significant part of the beginning. So I'm not just looking at what's happened at that moment, I'm looking at what impact that has later on. Okay, I've also picked out here nature, because nature is a key theme. So wherever possible, if we're going to be talking about how nature is represented or how things are done to disturb the natural order and nature itself as God intended it, then it fits with the overarching theme of Macbeth too. Importantly here, towards the end, I'm referring to the superstitious Jacobean audience. So I'm making historical contextual links to show that I understand that how Shakespeare was writing about Macbeth was influenced by his audience at the time and by society's beliefs and structures at the time too. And we've brought in these ideas about controlling the weather, stereotypical witch behaviour, their power, how they're not to be trusted. And again, King James I was a real significant influence in how Shakespeare wrote Macbeth. And of course Macbeth was writing this as one of the king's men to be performed for James I, who had a real interest in demonology and witchcraft and had his own personal experiences with them. So it's really, really important that we make sure that we include this contextual information at some point through our writing to show that we understand all of these ideas and not just abstract ideas. We've just pulled the information from the language, we've just inferred, we've dug deeper, we've gone beyond the surface to some of the more subtle meanings, but that these meanings are rooted in what was happening at the time. So if you really want to get smart and take your learning further, why don't you try writing your own paragraph or essay on the presentation of the witches at the beginning of the play, perhaps using some of the ideas that we've discussed already in this video to help you structure your own ideas, but then continue to look at the rest of the scene and see what you can pull out of the meaning from that. And perhaps even this might take you on to the second point here, where you could do some research into the number 3 and where 3 appears in Macbeth. It can't be ignored that there are 3 witches, as 3 was often seen as a number which represented bad luck. But it's an interesting idea that runs throughout the play that you might like to do a little bit of further research on yourself.